There is no other retired baseball player as famous as Babe Ruth. The Babe remains an icon through movies, documentaries, books, and American folklore. His larger-than-life personality goes hand in hand with his enormous impact on the game, and that's why Ruth became the most legendary figure in the history of sports. Even though you may think you know a lot about Babe Ruth already, here are 10 lesser-known facts about the 7-time World Series champion and the man who saved baseball. Ruth grew up in an orphanage. George Herman Ruth had one of the most difficult childhoods imaginable, and his early life reads like something out of a Charles Dickens novel. Born in Baltimore in 1895, Ruth's parents were unable to care for him and his sister and sent 7-year-old George to St. Mary's Industrial School for Boys, which was essentially an orphanage and a reform school combined. His father, George Sr., was a saloon keeper who struggled with alcohol and barely made enough money to keep the family afloat. His mother, Kate, died when Ruth was just a teenager, leaving him essentially parentless. At St. Mary's, Ruth was raised by Catholic brothers who taught him discipline, structure, and most importantly, baseball. Brother Matthias became a father figure to Ruth and taught him how to play the game that would make him famous. Matthias was a giant of a man, standing 6'6" and weighing over 250 pounds, and he could hit baseballs farther than anyone Ruth had ever seen. The harsh conditions at the school shaped Ruth's tough exterior, but also his generous heart. Despite his fame and fortune, Ruth always credited St. Mary's and Brother Matthias for saving his life and turning him into the man he became. Ruth almost became a professional boxer. Before Ruth became a baseball legend, he seriously considered becoming a professional boxer. Ruth was a natural athlete with quick hands and surprising agility for his size. During his time at St. Mary's, he was involved in boxing and showed real promise in the ring. Brother Matthias encouraged Ruth to pursue baseball instead, believing he had more potential on the diamond than in the boxing ring. Ruth continued to box recreationally throughout his life and even participated in exhibition matches during the off-season. His boxing skills actually helped his baseball career, as the hand-eye coordination and timing he developed in the ring translated perfectly to hitting a baseball. Ruth's aggressive style and fearless approach to both sports showed his competitive nature and willingness to take on any challenge. If he had chosen boxing over baseball, the entire history of American sports might have been different, and we might never have known the greatest home run hitter who ever lived. Ruth started his career as a pitcher. Most people think of Babe Ruth as the greatest home run hitter who ever lived. But what many don't know is that he was actually one of the best pitchers in baseball before he became a slugger. When Ruth broke into the majors with the Boston Red Sox in 1914, he was primarily a left-handed pitcher, and a damn good one at that. Ruth posted a career ERA of 2.28 over 6 seasons as a pitcher, which is absolutely elite by any standard. He went 94-46 on the mound, including a 24-13 record in 1917 with a 2.01 ERA that year. Ruth also holds the record for consecutive scoreless innings in World Series play at 29 2/3 innings, a record that stood for 43 years until Whitey Ford broke it in 1961. His fastball was clocked at around 90 miles per hour, which was blazing fast for the deadball era when most pitchers topped out in the low 80s. Teammates said he looked like he was playing catch with a friend rather than trying to strike out major league hitters. It wasn't until 1918 that the Red Sox started playing him in the outfield more regularly to get his bat in the lineup every day. Ruth hit his first home run against his future team. On May 6, 1915, Ruth hit his first major league home run at the Polo Grounds in New York. And the circumstances surrounding this historic blast make it even more special. Ironically, it came against the Yankees, the team he would later make famous. And the pitcher who gave up the historic blast was Jack Warhop. What makes this story even more interesting is that Ruth's first home run was hit in the same ballpark where he would later become a legend. The Polo Grounds was the Yankees' home field from 1913 to 1922, before they moved to Yankee Stadium, which was built specifically to take advantage of Ruth's left-handed power stroke. Ruth's first home run traveled an estimated 350 feet into the right field stands. which was impressive for the dead ball era when home runs were much rarer than they are today. The ball was hit so hard that fans in the stands couldn't believe what they just witnessed. What's even more remarkable is that Ruth was still primarily a pitcher at this point in his career. He was only playing in the outfield occasionally. Little did anyone know that this first blast would be the beginning of a record-breaking career that would see Ruth hit 714 more home runs. Ruth was traded to fund Broadway shows. Ruth's sale from Boston to New York in 1920 created one of the most famous curses in sports history. But the real story behind the trade is even more outrageous than most people think. Red Sox owner Harry Frazee sold Ruth to the Yankees for $100,000 in cash plus a $300,000 loan to finance his Broadway shows. While the popular story claims this was specifically for No No Nanette, that musical didn't actually open until 1925. The money was more likely used for My Lady Friends, which opened in 1919, though Frazee did eventually produce No No Nanette as well. The decision was purely financial and had nothing to do with baseball. Frazee was hemorrhaging money and needed cash fast, so he sold the best player in baseball to fund his theatrical ambitions. After Ruth left Boston, the Red Sox didn't win another World Series for 86 years, while the Yankees became the most successful franchise in sports history, winning 26 championships during that span. What made the curse even more painful for Red Sox fans was that Ruth thrived in New York like never before, hitting more home runs in his first season with the Yankees than he had in any season with Boston. Ruth would often joke about the trade, saying he was glad to get out of Boston because New York had better restaurants and nightlife. The curse was finally broken when the Red Sox came back from a 3-0 deficit against the Yankees to win the 2004 World Series. But it took 86 years of suffering for Red Sox fans to get their revenge. Ruth had a legendary appetite. Babe Ruth's appetite was as legendary as his home runs, and his eating habits would make competitive eaters today jealous. Ruth was famous for his enormous consumption of food and alcohol, often eating a dozen hot dogs before games, washed down with several bottles of soda and beer. His pregame meals were the stuff of legend, with teammates watching in amazement as Ruth devoured massive quantities of food just hours before taking the field. A typical Ruth pregame meal might include a dozen hot dogs, 4 hamburgers, a whole apple pie, and a case of soda, all consumed within 2 hours of game time. Despite his poor eating habits, Ruth was still an incredible athlete who could run the bases and play outfield effectively for most of his career. His metabolism must have been incredible because he maintained his power and stamina while consuming what would hospitalize most people. His famous stomach ache in 1925, dubbed the bellyache heard round the world, was officially attributed to eating too many hot dogs and drinking too much soda. The incident landed Ruth in the hospital for several weeks and cost him nearly half the season. Ruth hit 60 home runs, but never 61. Despite being the most famous home run hitter in history, Ruth never actually hit 61 home runs in a single season, and this fact often surprises people who assume he must have hit more. His career high was 60 home runs in 1927, a record that stood for 34 years until Roger Maris broke it in 1961 with 61 homers. What makes Ruth's 60 home run season even more impressive is that he did it in just 154 games, while Maris needed 161 games to break the record. Ruth hit his 60th home run on September 30th, the second to last day of the season, off Washington pitcher Tom Zachary. Ruth's 60 home runs in 1927 represented nearly 14% of all home runs in the American League that year, which shows just how dominant he was compared to his peers. For context, if a player today hit 14% of all home runs in their league, they would need to hit about 350 home runs in a single season. The 1927 Yankees are considered by many to be the greatest team in baseball history, and Ruth's 60 home runs were a huge reason why they dominated that season, going 1-10 in 44. Ruth earned more money than the president. In 1930, Ruth signed a contract worth $80,000, making him the highest-paid player in baseball and one of the highest-paid people in America. When a reporter pointed out that Ruth was making more money than President Herbert Hoover, who earned $75,000 annually, Ruth famously replied, "I had a better year than he did." This quote perfectly captured Ruth's confidence and humor, while also highlighting just how valuable he was to the Yankees. Ruth actually did have a better year than Hoover. In 1930, Ruth hit 49 home runs and batted .359, while Hoover was dealing with the start of the Great Depression and plummeting approval ratings. Ruth's salary was astronomical for the time, when the average American worker made about $1,500 per year. Ruth was making more than 50 times that amount. His earning power extended beyond his salary, as he also made money from endorsements, barnstorming tours, and personal appearances. Ruth was one of the first athletes to understand the power of celebrity endorsements, and he lent his name to everything from candy bars to underwear to automobiles. Ruth may have called his shot. One of the most debated moments in baseball history is Ruth's supposed called shot in the 1932 World Series against the Chicago Cubs. In Game 3 at Wrigley Field, Ruth stepped up to the plate in the 5th inning with the Cubs fans heckling him mercilessly. The crowd was throwing lemons at him and screaming insults, while the Cubs players were jawing at him from the dugout. According to the legend, Ruth pointed to center field and then hit the very next pitch from Charlie Root exactly where he pointed for a massive home run that traveled an estimated 440 feet. The moment became instantly legendary. But here's the thing. Nobody knows if it actually happened the way it's been told. Some witnesses say Ruth was just pointing at the Cubs dugout or holding up fingers to indicate the count. Others insist he definitely called a shot. The Cubs pitcher Charlie Root always denied that Ruth called his shot and said he would have thrown at Ruth's head if he'd actually pointed to the outfield. Ruth himself gave different versions of the story over the years, sometimes confirming it and sometimes being vague about what really happened. Regardless of what really occurred, the called shot became part of Ruth's mythology and cemented his reputation as baseball's ultimate showman. Ruth ended his career with a 3-home run game. Ruth's final game as a player was actually with the Boston Braves, not the New York Yankees. In 1935, at age 40, Ruth signed with the Braves, hoping to eventually become the team's manager, though that never materialized. His last hurrah came on May 25, 1935 at Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, where Ruth hit 3 home runs in a single game, including the first ball ever hit completely out of the stadium. The 3rd home run was the 714th and final home run of his career, traveling an estimated 600 feet. It was a fitting end to the most prolific home run career in baseball history at that point. Ruth struggled with his health and mobility during his time with the Braves, hitting just .181 with 6 home runs in 28 games before retiring just 5 days after his 3-home run game. He knew his body couldn't handle the rigors of professional baseball anymore, but he went out on top with one of the greatest individual performances of his career. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video and comment to us to know which fact surprised you the most. Subscribe for more legendary baseball stories every week. This is Inside Baseball, where we bring you the best of the game.